Brian Johnson is the school superintendent in Hamilton County. And the story in the Times Free Press today by Rosanna Hughes tells about a meeting yesterday, which had a very good turnout of parents who's in such numbers that the cars were stacked up in a church parking lot next door, and even on surrounding streets. They want to hear what is ahead in the opportunity zone. This is wonderful. Americans are just really wonderful in how they can take something that's a wreck, dress it up, and make it seem like a benefit. And that is, that's the whole advertising culture where you have something which is just humdrum, like a particular service that's an ordinary service, and you're going to make it something remarkable. So advertising is part of course, how government sells itself and making itself indispensable. And in the event last night, we as we read from the Times Free Press narrative, we hear about how these schools will be doing better. Brainerd High, Howard High School, and if there's more staff, if there's targeted support, that's a word in the story. And then there's a heightened urgency for improvement. The superintendent says, "We desire the school system to be the fastest improving school system in the state of Tennessee." Now that's saying a lot. We have to give him credit. And we firmly believe, he says, that what happens within these 12 schools will be catalytic and critical to the success of our system. Well, it all sounds very, very good. And you have an improvement zone, right? You have I zones and improvement zones. And what you think is that word applies to the students, right? We're going to improve the students' lives and improve their outlook. And so we have these words that are just bureaucratic words, marketing words. We apply that to the student, and somehow we feel better about everything. We feel that once again, there's hope. If we have just the right words about reform, just the right words about renewal of efforts, reorganization, even if nothing really changes internally, the people will be satisfied. And that of course, is what the press has to do. The press conveys in the best light what the arguments are by the administrator, state government, and the overseer, the real patron of the county school system, the real customer, I guess you could say, of the county school system, and then the officials locally. There's in the photograph, in a related article, teaser in the Times Free Press website, there's a picture of Brian Johnson with pursing his lips. It's a kind of an odd picture to choose. He's very human in that shot. That's what he does at home when he's not quite sure how to discipline an errant child before dinner. Right, you got dinner on the table, and here you have an errant child, and if you have to deal with that child properly, it's going to take 15 minutes. And so, well, what about dinner? It looked like he's trying to figure something out. That's the expression captured by the photographer. He says you can do whatever you want to do with strategy, but if the culture isn't right, he says, then nothing else matters. What we see tonight is the culture has shifted. There's an expectation for excellence. So again, we have words that apply to an intractable situation. And as you read this account, you're supposed to think that, well, it's probably okay. Things are going to get better, even though you don't have any child in that school anymore. You're paying for it. And so to not have you be weary of paying for it, for you to not have the sense of being drained year after year of paying taxes and subsidizing the children of other people, you say, well, it's probably good. An article like this appeals to your civic virtue. It appeals to your sense of generosity, that you just want the best for these people. And as you read stories like this, you save yourself from having to think about the whole injustice at the start, right? The whole premise that we have to have a compulsory system to teach about the free market, to teach about mathematics, to teach about geography and American history and sports. None of these things would happen if we didn't have force. We wouldn't have ball teams. We wouldn't have baseball stadiums. We would not have rugby matches. We would not have any of these benefits that are extracurricular or curricular if it were not by force. We have to have force. And it's inconceivable, I think, for most people that you could have not a system of education, but you could have an education free market. which exists, of course, it exists, but it's strangled for capital as it is this year as it is every year. It's about 10% of the education market, but it has competition where the nominal client, the family, has it all paid for. So how do you compete? How do you compete against a system where everything is subsidized? How does a restaurant chain that charges $3 for a hamburger compete against a chain store next door across the stoplight where the hamburgers are free, right? It's free, and the quality may not be quite as good, but it is free, and it is healthy. And as the sign in front of Wendy says, it's got quality. It has quality. And here now we have the promise that culture, we have culture. If the culture isn't right, if the culture it hasn't shifted, which it has, then we're in trouble. But it has shifted, and there is, he says, an expectation of excellence. And so that's where we leave it, right? We leave it right there, and we feel that it's okay. No, it's okay. You know, we have public schools, and they're always being reformed. They're always the laggards. If we had a genuine open market where the parents, again, were encouraged to take responsibility for their own decisions and made market choices, what would happen to the 12 schools? Well, they would have, of course, their own boards. They would maybe be owned by a trust or a nonprofit organization or a church organization or a church directly or a private board. If the struggle doesn't ameliorate, if the struggle doesn't end and reforms made, well, guess what? Those schools close. They simply go out of business. And is it news? No, it's not news. It's just the market. People come and go all the time in the marketplace. Restaurants close and open. But of course, if Mike Perry, who is the deputy business editor at the Times Free Press, and Dave Flessner, our leading journalist in Chattanooga, if they don't notice your restaurant closing or your shop closing, there's no coverage. But if they do notice, well, you get a story, right? You get a story about this restaurant closing, that chain store closing. We have had quite a few of those recently, and so, but it may be that a school shuts down without anybody caring or noticing, and that's because it's not a public matter. And I think that way you have think just for a second of the great efficiencies of that, where individual units, individual corporations shut down because they just can't make it. They can't find the right teachers. They can't find the right capital. They can't pay their rent. The board, which is mostly volunteer, is weary of trouble in the hallways, or crimes that take place, or an abuse situation, or you have someone in the back office that's stealing from the cash flow. Those schools, they shut down in despair, and the people move on, right? They move on. But here, if it's public, well, we have to keep them alive. We have to have zombie schools in Hamilton County. And we do it because we have a civic virtue, right? In fact, we're local economy. We're all local economy. We care about our schools. These are our schools. They have on the staff our neighbors. And the administrator is a man we see at the Food City, and we know his wife. In fact, we know his old mother, and we know went to school with his brother, and so on. We have these personal connections. And so the neighborliness of a local community, of a city, puts a face on a faceless machine. And because there are these faces there, we just accept and we hope for the best. We just hope for the best. And there's no real prospect of reform, because we can't get rid of the zombies. We can't just shut them down, and we can't get government, which is to say, again, politics and law, out of this sector, which should be about caring for children, caring for families, and having a real argument about God, right? Education is not a religiously neutral enterprise, and in our state-run school system, which is highly progressive and constitutional, right? It's in the Constitution. Though one of the three legs that are requirements of that system are soundly ignored. It is unconstitutional for disobeying one of the three requirements. It's constitutional, and so we just kind of accept it. And I would suggest that there should be over time rising dissatisfaction. And no matter what I say or don't say, the market will move past public schooling. It will go under. In fact, I would suggest that the PDF and the internet Khan Academy, and YouTube all are working together to overturn the university model. On the larger side, where you have these giant universities, they are ridiculously rejecting the fact that we have the internet today, and we have so many things that are free, put there by people who care, put there books that are published for free, innumerable things, courses. You can have whole university courses you can take on your own. If you can just get someone to certify that you saw those courses or heard those courses, then you might be getting somewhere to have not certification of the institution anymore, but certification of the individual. And that is, by the way, one of the arguments made by a very noted American writer, Charles Hugh Smith, who writes at of2minds.com. That's a very highly regarded website. I do suggest you subscribe to it, or go there. It's of2minds.com. George Soros is transferring $18 billion to his foundation called the Open Society Foundation. This is a story in the Wall Street Journal yesterday, and by Juliet Chung and Unuprita Das. And it's about the wealth this man has created. He used to have 30% return in the early years of his hedge fund, which is a gambling house. He's making about an 11% return now. He is a Hungarian, and he's transferred $18 billion from the $26 billion Soros fund management to a charity with a very liberal perspective that has gotten involved in some important issues, including justice reform and the rule of law, and also he's funding Black Lives Matter as well, which is in many respects Black Lives Matter as a kind of an organization without an organization has a kind of left-wing argument, but which rose from the police violence, the lawful police abuse out of Ferguson, Missouri, a couple of years ago, and that on that point, I think if the people who are spending this money, riding shotgun on these millions of dollars, if that's something that they're seeking to reform, well, I think they're probably on the right path. The Soros Fund is a hedge fund. Now, a hedge fund simply is a fund in which you hedge your bets. You hedge your bets on whether the pound will rise against the euro, whether the euro will fall against the dollar, or whether some contract in the insurance sector is going to go up or going to go down depending on wheat futures. Right. That's what a hedge fund is. The story says it's largely free of regulation and increasingly popular with wealthy clans, such as the Soros Foundation. Now, Soros gives this money out through the main foundation to about 40 other foundations in numerous countries. And the focus is relief, public health, minority rights. And the story says that national governments, or nationalist governments, it says, are often very upset with him in his home Hungary. The government there targeted a university that he founded, and which has run poster campaigns singling him out for his support of refugees. And of course, in this country, conservatives are, as the story says, use him as a lightning rod. Right, Soros' name is anathema, and he's excoriated for being on the wrong side of things from the conservative perspective. He made his millions, his first billion, in the 1990s when he bet against the British pound. And the story says that it reminds us that he broke the Bank of England by betting against it, and he earned his first billion from that gamble. These are all hedge funds are just gambling on effectively the gyrations of value among fiat paper currencies. So you have hedge funds only in a stratospheric thin. There's thin oxygen in where we are now in these investment area that bet on gyrations of non-constitutional fiat money that steals from the poor. Right, the fiat money steals from poor people, and so that is George Soros. He's really there. He really does exist. I remember during the campaign for president, I saw a post, and I actually half believed it, that he had died. And but again, it was just a bit of fictional fluff that was on the internet. Now, I want to mention something that happened yesterday in Maryland, and it's about Leroy Carhart. He is a late-term baby killer. He will kill a boy or a girl the moment of birth. Actually, just before birth, he will kill a baby, which they routinely would describe as full term. He started a clinic that was to have opened yesterday, apparently in Germantown, Maryland, but there were protests. And at lifesitenews.com, there's a photograph of some young women standing in a row, black and white, holding different signs. For example, Stop Abortion Now. Standing for Life is standing for women. There's the Family Research Council action. And he had two clinics, one in Bellevue, Nebraska, and this one in Germantown. At the Germantown location, he did abortions through all 9 months of pregnancies. Pro-lifers were overjoyed to learn at the end of the summer that the Maryland Coalition of Life had bought the building in which the Germantown Reproductive Health Services was located, shutting down Carhart's business. Now, that's remarkable because about 25 years ago here in Chattanooga on Vance Road, Christian people bought out the building from under a baby killer physician who was a member, I think, of the National Guard. And the owner of the building was a member at First Presbyterian Church, in good standing, though I think he may have been under some kind of correction, or especially in light of my lawsuit. I filed an ecclesiastical lawsuit against him in that church, calculating that he earned $24 per boy or girl slain. Now he was under the care of the session. And was this narrative, by the way, is reported only at Nooganomics.com, where I'm the author of the main history of that baby killing operation, the Chattanooga Women's Clinic. We have successfully prevented Carhart from opening his illegal abortion facility in Bethesda today as planned, but we have only won the first round of what we expect will be a tough fight to protect babies and their mothers from Carhart's shoddy abortion practices. This is Troy Newman, president of Operation Rescue. We pray this facility will never be allowed to open. There is no doubt that Carhart believes he can break the law without consequences. Troy Newman says this time he tried to pull a fast one and got caught. We call on the Department of Health to permanently shut down his illegal abortion business. His attempt to conduct late-term abortions illegally is so egregious that we urge the medical board to revoke Carhart's Maryland medical license permanently. And that's at lifesitenews.com. And there's a story at Breitbart today touching on the same question about boys and girls, whether they should be slaughtered with the protection of police and city governments. In Michigan, Michael Arthur Roth, who was caught by police with 14 containers of aborted baby parts in his car, has entered a plea of no contest. This is according to Breitbart, 3 felony counts of larceny in a building. He's 75 years old and appeared in a Macomb County Circuit Court on Monday in a case that started in October 2015 when cops discovered stolen drugs, abortion equipment, and aborted baby remains in the trunk of his car. They found 14 containers of human tissue, possibly fetuses, medical equipment, and large amounts of fentanyl, a drug used for pain and sedation. He had been suspected of being involved in killing babies in illegal home abortions. The discovery of the cache came about as the result of an automobile accident in which he hit a special needs child, critically injuring him. Police investigators obtained warrants to search the car that was impounded, and they found this human tissue along with other these other things that are described as contraband. He had been in the news before. He has a history of botched abortions, prescribing drugs without a license, according to Breitbart, and medical board discipline, as well as a restraining order against him by his wife. In 1988, he admitted that he had no objections to performing sex-selective abortions, which most often are carried out to weed out which sex, do you suppose, which sex is weeded out. I have no ethical problems with it. He said, absolutely not. I think that abortion should be available on demand. In other words, there's no limit to be made on killing boys and girls. Now, your Republicans and Democrats Some of them, if they have any kind of conscience, will say, well, let's allow you to kill babies only in the first 10 weeks, right? So babies only in the first 15 weeks. That's okay. Our consciences can live with that. But this man, a courageous man indeed, says that you have no compunction about any destruction whatsoever for any reason whatsoever. They're all right and true, and I am here to serve. I'm here with my vacuum cleaner and my scalpel to serve you. David Tulis, Nooga Radio, brought to you by Nooganomics.com. That's Nooganomics.com.
The Tennessee Valley's news talk leader, Nooga Radio.